In a world where talent is evenly distributed, but venture capital is concentrated in coastal silos, smart startup money is heading for the Mid-Continent. Welcome to the Midcon Markup, a podcast that uncovers the inspiring stories of our visionary tech entrepreneurs and the investors who believe in them. I'm your host, Cody Merrill with Cortado Ventures. Listen, learn, and make your Midcon Markup. Welcome to another episode of the Midcon VC podcast. Today, we are lucky to be with one of our very own founders, Dr. Pinkey Patel with Myri Health. Pinkey, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, can you give us a little bit, or just a basic primer on Myri, and then we'll take several steps back and kind of tell the story from the beginning.
Yeah, so Myri Health is an evidence-based comprehensive resource mobile application for families. So something that is rooted in science that families can use when they walk out of those two hospital doors. Because essentially it was built because I felt a void that there weren't any resources postpartum and multiple touch points in pregnancy.
So can you walk us through early childhood education? What were your motivations? What did you want to do? What did you want to be when you grow up?
We're going to go back.
Yeah.
So my parents immigrated here with $7 from India. No education, no English. And the goal was either become a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, or just anything that's an American dream. So it was going to be something in healthcare because I loved science and math. And then I landed on pharmacy. So it was either medical school or pharmacy. And I loved being able to help others through science and through community. So that's why I went through pharmacy school. So I graduated here, actually in Oklahoma, and went to undergrad here, got my doctorate from University of Oklahoma in pharmacy. So that's where we started. And I actually practiced pharmacy for 11 years. And I actually built Myri while I was working full-time. Now we're full-time at Myri. And a little bit, in addition to being a pharmacist, a clinical pharmacist, and having a background in healthcare, I'm also a personal trainer that specializes in pre- and postnatal corrective exercise, which is where Myri kind of comes in because I started to get really intrigued by the lack of support from a physiology standpoint. Like you reorganize your organs to create a space for a baby. And then it fundamentally did not make sense to me when I got pregnant that, okay, so like what happens after this? You just push this thing out and you go 6 weeks and you're automatically able to move and shake however you'd like. So that's kind of how Myri came about from the early, stages.
Is there a difference between the postpartum support that the average wealthy woman receives as opposed to middle income and lower income mother?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of disparities, demographic differences. I would hate to say that there's significant because this was created out of a need from somebody who was health literate, had access to resources. I was working for a large healthcare company, and I felt a void being in that position. So I only could imagine what somebody who was lower income, living in a rural community, lesser access, would go through. So that was kind of the pivotal moment where I'm like, if I'm experiencing this level of gaps in care, then what is the mom in middle of nowhere, Oklahoma, experiencing that doesn't have access to resources, that doesn't have healthcare insurance? So there's not a huge gap. Just very recently in New York, I believe they've started a very expensive, even for the middle class woman. I think it's a postpartum retreat for the mom. I think per day it's like $1,400. That's per day. And even I think a upper middle class woman that would still argue that that is very difficult to meet. So there's not, arguably, there's not a big gap fundamentally. The lack of access to healthcare and postpartum still exists.
Why is it that in society there's breast cancer awareness? NFL's all over it, NBA's all over it. Men want to show that they support women, and there's a lot of support for women whenever they have babies. And everybody looks back, and everyone's a mama's boy or mama's girl. Everyone loves their mom and appreciates them.
Yeah.
Why is there such little awareness about what this very important mom does and experiences right after the baby leaves the body?
I think we are just now talking about this, and unfortunately it's 2023. There's a few reasons. The first one is that up until now, I mean, babies have been born for hundreds of thousands of years. We, as women, are just conditioned to, well, my mom did it, my grandma did it, they felt fine. There's not been much dialogue around what we truly experience. And just now, because of social media and TikTok and Instagram and people talking to one another openly and discussing their experiences, is it becoming a thing? So like even mental health. Mental health is such a large part of postpartum that goes, it certainly goes not discussed as often. And it's because there's a level of stigma associated with it and judgment. The other piece that I've learned as I'm talking to other male VCs and other male clients is that they feel more open to tell me, oh, well, this is kind of a personal topic, but my wife went through a lot of this for 4 years. And I'm like, 4 years? That's a long time. Not only is the mom just kind of suffering in silence just because she feels like society paints a picture that we have to do all these things. Like you see, oh, she's a super mom. Like we use that so easily. Like I don't want to be called a super mom. I don't want to be a super mom sometimes. I just want to be just a normal mom. I want to chill. I don't want to be a super mom. I don't want to wear a cape. But it's like they put you up on a pedestal and there's so much expectation. And then fundamentally, that's harming us. And the dad, there's a lot of men that have now told me, and they feel, for some reason, they're like, oh, I can tell Pinkey this because she built Myri. But they're like, during those 4 years, it was really tough for me because she was going through a lot and she had postpartum depression. And then we had to get her on medications. And then I was not as present at work. And there's that trickle effect. But it's not pretty. It's very messy. And then the last reason is, we have the worst maternity leave in the entire world. We have to go back to work, some of us, at 6 weeks. No one's sleeping. We're fundamentally not even moving like we should be. And a lot of us are feeding our babies from our bodies. And so when you go back to work and your employer, you don't tell your employer that, hey, you're struggling with all this. In fact, you're feeling guilty because you've taken off some time. So you're actually having to catch up with the rest of the crew back at work by meeting performance metrics. So the employers that we're working with now, they're like, why are these moms not telling us that they're going through these, they're struggling? And I'm like, the last person they want to tell that they're struggling is their employer, right? So it's layered, but it's certainly not glamorous. And I think there's a long trickle effect in our society by not addressing this.
I feel like in society, there's a stigma around any sort of mental health. Like it's not easy for anybody to openly admit that they're struggling with it. There's a level of weakness, of vulnerability that's uncomfortable. But it seems like it would be particularly so for a woman, where society has this expectation that you have this magical childbirth and childhood and motherhood. This is everything that you should ever aspire to do. Do women just feel even more trapped, even more stigma? Is that what you've extracted from your conversations with customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I built Myri. We started with zero product. It was built community first. It was built community first because I leaned in on my community, and I would just get on the internet and post a picture of myself and go, hey, this is me in the rocking chair and this is how I feel. And everybody painted a picture that I was supposed to be glowy and baby in hand. Like I have a glowy picture in the studio. Was I internally glowing? No. It was like we were sweating. Sometimes we're swearing. There's milk everywhere. It's really not glowy, but it's really pretty. And the fan's blowing and the baby's sleeping. And then I go home and I'm like, no one's glowing here. And then they're like, me too, me too, me too, me too. And I'm like, oh, wow, I found my tribe, right? Like you get it. And so, there's even more of a stigma because then social media is great, right? You can open it up. It's a double-edged sword. It's like, it's a good thing because you can find your community, but sometimes it can also make you feel like you're not doing enough. So when you're looking around you don't find those folks who are being very non-judgmental and open with their experiences, you automatically feel like, I'm going to shut down a little bit because I don't think I'm able to say anything about this. So this whole picture that society paints harms us sometimes because then you walk out and you're like, wait, where's my awesome experience? And so then you feel like something's wrong with me until you find out that, hey, wait, it's not just you. It's like pretty much all of us. We've all gone through some sort of like slump, whether it's postpartum depression or the blues that are supposed to last 2 weeks. The postpartum blues, 80% of women have that. And it's supposed to last 2 weeks. When you cross 2 weeks, it's something else. And a lot of women don't know that. A lot of it is because of society. And I think having more conversations and making motherhood not so glam would help.
It's interesting that you started this business from a community-first perspective, and you have a very genuine, authentic story about your personal experience with childbirth and the postpartum process. How have you managed to convert your community and your passion and mission into a business that predominantly a male-led VC world has funded? And just what has that process been like? So like from the convincing men and convincing the world to understand that there's a business case, but also like, what is the business? Who's paying? Right. What does growth look like? What does winning look like to you?
Before I even built the community for Myri, it wasn't even called Myri then. And I worked with over 4,000 women directly to understand their pain points. So that was my comprehensive market research. So I did the homework. Then whenever we launched it, it was live in 166 countries. Don't recommend doing that 3 weeks before delivering your second baby. And I put it out there with zero marketing and ad spend just to see like, who's going to pay for this? The interesting part about all of this, I was like going into labor, just a true story. And there were countries that were downloading it. And I was like, what are they typing? And why are these women looking for this? This is a global problem, obviously. It was just kind of like let's experiment. And that was interesting to me. Like 44 countries were paying for this. Some of them didn't even speak English as a predominant language, but they were looking for something for postpartum. So the whole D2C experience provided invaluable market data, built our brand identity, and really let me understand the customer. At the end of the day, we're building for moms. And obviously there's still not an awesome solution yet because we're all still struggling in different areas. Those 200,000 users that we grew organically, globally, that's my use case to talk to male VCs. Like VCs is a predominantly, they're all, a majority of them are male that I'm talking to, right? And so when you're building this use case, from my perspective, it's very difficult to raise capital, especially when you're talking about postpartum to particularly male. But what I learned is that, my metrics had to be better. I had to prove it out a little, like I had to have 10 times better metrics. I felt like I had to have better market research, which I did all my homework. But when I started talking to these men, if they were dads, like I gave them about 10 minutes into my story and they were like, well, like this happened to my one. And then it's like, they actually went through it with their partner. So if they were a dad, I instantly they were able to connect with me. And my first checks were a white man and, a black man and a brown man, like they were men. So that was really interesting to see.
What about men who don't have that personal experience?
So those were harder to convince. Like when I get on a call, I can immediately tell that that's a dad or not a dad. Because I'll talk about it and I'm like, I'll have to particularly now ask, do you have any kids? But majority of the time I can tell they're nodding their head. They're like, yeah, that happened to us. Oh my gosh, yeah. And so I'll get it. But if they're not dads, or they don't have actively been around young children, there is a larger education piece that has to go into the conversation.
I guess I'm struggling to fully understand why they can't just understand that 50% of 7 billion people are women, a certain percentage of them are mothers,
right.
And within the academic literature, postpartum depression and other postpartum related issues, whether it's physical or mental that you address, this is very well documented. Why do they need that personal connection to part with the money?
Yeah, that is something I'm still struggling to understand, that it's like, how many statistics do I need to put out here? Very recently, this was unfortunate, and I'm kind of shocked that maternal mortality got worse, like the worst that it's ever been recently. And I'm like, how does that not signal that there needs to be some sort of resources available? I don't know why there's such a gap. I feel like the one question I do get from men who are not involved in the family space or have had children themselves is they're like, well, when I see the word postpartum, they instantly think postpartum depression. And I'm like, postpartum is a phase of life after baby, just like prepartum or peripartum, right? It's like a phase of life. And they're like, oh, I'm like, we're not just dealing with postpartum depression. We work with a lot of different areas within postpartum. And so then I've had a question where it blows my mind that, well, why do you think that happens? And I'm like, why do you think that doesn't happen? I'm like, postpartum depression is largely, it's a chemical imbalance. You've had all these hormones in your body while you built a baby with a brain and organs. Like, how did you think that happened? Things were changing in our bodies to create that human being, and it's no longer in your body anymore. So there's a fluctuation of hormones, and then you compound the stress of going back to work. You compound feeding a baby. Like, when I had my child, I was like, there's food coming out of my body that this baby is going to eat and need to survive. Like, the level of stress for mothers breastfeeding. I had a 60-hour unmedicated labor down the street at OU Medical Center. And I thought that was going to be the most challenging part of my postpartum or my motherhood experience, is pushing a baby out without even Advil. It was the worst part was going home without any resources. The worst part was actually going home and rocking my baby every night. Well, they don't sleep a lot in the beginning. So if you're a parent, you know that. But they eat every 2 to 3 hours. And so I was just like, wait, like, I don't get to stop. And so those things were very difficult for me. But if you think like you're feeding a baby, food's coming out of your body, that's fundamentally what it is. It's thriving off of you. And the lack of sleep. No one ever tells you that you have to actually operate while you're essentially a zombie and making milk and keeping a baby alive. All of those things compounded lead to potential mental health disorders, right? That would take like superhuman powers to get through postpartum without being fazed by any of those things.
So it's like I pride myself on trying to be empathetic, but I've never grown up anticipating that at some point in time I'm going to give birth to a child. And so like the idea of like my body changing fairly dramatically overnight isn't a fear that I've like grappled with and dealt with. Do a lot of women on the app, like, is that hard for them to deal with? The
body image?
Like, yeah.
I mean, personally, I'm a trainer and I struggled with that in pregnancy. I worked out 6 days a week, tracked my macros, like I was that person. And I still struggled every morning because I woke up and I was like, whoa, where did that come from? Or where did this come from? Or it's kind of like the only thing that this is kind of funny. The only thing that is probably similar is like the movie The Santa Claus with Tim Allen, where he wakes up and he gets a little bigger. I'm like, oh, wow, a man actually gets to experience getting larger and like having a different body change, because that's what it feels like when you're pregnant. And during that time frame in pregnancy, those 9 months, like I didn't personally love being pregnant. Like some people love just having a belly. And I was just like, yeah, I don't, that's cool. I get to feel the baby. And I was like, this is beautiful and making a human. But I didn't like the entire pregnancy for the reason of like the hormones that were shifting. You're going through a lot emotionally. My body's changing. Couldn't move as fast. Can't eat the things that you like.
Can't wear the same clothes.
You can't. You can't wear the same clothes. So you're like, wait. And as a woman in a society where they constantly want you to be smaller, it's even harder to kind of walk through those 9 months and be like, I feel so confident in my body. I think majority of women at the beginning struggle with the body image. And I don't think you can really prepare yourself for that. So even like being a woman, I wasn't like, yeah, one day I'm going to get bigger, and have a baby. And it's like, you're just kind of going, okay, this is what we're doing here.
You have to live with the unpleasant
correct
practicalities of life for the joy of getting to raise your kids and have a family later.
Right. But then that beautiful picture that you imagine is going to happen often doesn't happen like until later. Right. It's like
there's not a magic wand that just gets away. There's
not, man. There's there's no abracadabra, unfortunately. And so I think that's kind of the reality that I talk about is like, this is the dream and this is often the reality. And we don't know how long that reality is for women. A lot of women struggle silently with their reality. And childcare is the next thing in America that we struggle with, because it's like, well, I have to go back to work. So who's taking care of the baby? There's a constant guilt that's associated with mothers that we're constantly having to navigate, or I call it like flex that muscle. I always say we have to like kick the mom guilt, because it just always comes with you, whether you're dropping the baby off at daycare or someone else is taking care of your baby at home. Yeah.
So you've validated the market need. It's obviously an enormous problem. 50% of the world are women. A decent portion of them have babies.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how do you convert these promising building blocks for a business into a
successful startup with a scalable sales process and something that can continue to hit venture benchmarks and eventually be a
I think
company.
that you start with the foundation, which we did, and you still say user obsessed, customer obsessed, because the end user is the mother, and you definitely don't want to make a new mom upset with an app that doesn't work or it's, in the beginning stages, not working as fast as you need it to work because moms don't have very much time. And so I think you learn that piece, you validate it, and then you move forward. And the way you move forward is kind of hitting the masses. We now are selling to municipalities, public health systems, and employers. So the employers that, with employers, it's a little bit of education where you're like, hey, do you know the cost of not supporting a mother postpartum? Like if you're a self-insured employer, identifying those channels of where you can show the ROI of beyond the basics of we should just be doing this for mothers. Let's be honest, like this should exist as an entrepreneur and a founder who's scaling a business kind of rapidly. The reality is, how do you speak to the masses? And when you have the data speaks for itself. And a lot of data, I'll say, hey, let's pull claims data for the last 12 months and let's see how much you spent on this mom. And then when you start talking a couple $1 million on therapy, evaluations, and the list goes on, then you get their attention. So unfortunately, it's not like you have to go back to the data. I can sit here all day and be like, you should care for mothers, but that's not how the world works. That's not how business works. So there's that piece. When it comes to public health, municipalities and states, they're very receptive to what we're trying to do because they're trying to enhance education and prevent postpartum mortality. So that's also data. So seeing where we can provide the most access, because accessibility is an issue. For instance, going live in rural counties is awesome for us because they love the fact that we can increase touch points for the mother and prevent deaths. Did you know the majority of deaths happen in postpartum than they do in pregnancy?
Really?
Yes. So those data sets and kind of articulating those things to the right customer is kind of where we're succeeding right now. Because at the end of the day, we can say, please help moms, but data doesn't lie.
Is there a B2B and a B2C component to this business?
There is. So B2C still exists. We started direct to consumers, right? And that is still organically, the mom is still paying for it on the App Store and the Google Play Store. Whether the employer covers it or whether the public health system covers it or not, because she still finds value and it's cheaper than seeing a physical therapist. It's cheaper than seeing some of those individual care providers. So there is a play to that. But right now we're prioritizing the B2B angle because we're able to reach more mothers. But that doesn't mean that we're ignoring the fact that they're still paying countries. There's still countries that are still paying for this out of their own pockets.
It seems to me like one of those businesses where it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
It doesn't.
You can have channel partners that can help you get distribution with mothers, and then eventually you can have network effects. Mothers are hearing about it through the grapevine,
right?
And then people can sign up, and it would be cascading success.
Yeah, so correct. There's a multi-channel approach here, and even the OBGYNs that have built trust with us, they're like, hey, I only see the mom one time in postpartum. Like, can you imagine like having this baby and the first person you see is your kid's pediatrician? Like at 3 days, I was at the office and I was like, why am I seeing you? Why am I not seeing anybody else? It's for the baby. It's all for the baby. And at 6 weeks, you see the provider. And then after that, you never see anybody again. So they're like, hey, take this with you or download this. So there's a multi-channel approach here. I don't think it has to be one or the other.
In general, preventative medical solutions, well, for one, they're awesome because they save a ballooning back-end expenses, but they're notoriously underutilized because there's not a strong impetus to act. The way the world typically works is there's a fire, here's a bucket, you buy the bucket of water, you put out the fire. How do you overcome the burden of a preventative medical solution?
Yeah, that's exactly what Myri is a preventative solution, right? And essentially, you're kind of in postpartum. You don't recognize physical therapy. That's what it was created. Physical therapy should be a component of postpartum care because there's a pelvic floor. It's a muscle. You can't see it. It's not shiny, so we don't really care about it. It's not your bicep or your abs. It's But it's more important than that because it held your baby in some really important organs. And so that's why I started it, is because we have to strengthen that muscle, because 24 months later, 10 years later, women are going in and, like, I call it the Band-Aid, having to have surgery to fix what was not addressed, initially. And so they're showing the data around the cost of having to fix those things is now getting attention from payers and plans, because to health plans, it's attractive because it's a preventative solution that is very low cost compared to what they might have to pay long term. So that is a longer term play. Health plans they're a little difficult to get, longer sales cycle, but it's certainly very attractive, because in a world where we don't want to eat healthy vegetables, it's like, why are we one of the most unhealthiest nations? Because we don't take preventative care seriously. And I'm not shocked that that same kind of analogy applies to pelvic health. I read a book, it's called French Women Don't Pee on Themselves, and that was what kind of started all of this. And I was like, why don't they? Incontinence is not an issue there as much as it is here, because they have 10 government-paid PT visits before they have to start exercising and moving their bodies. So that's where the preventative, like, other countries are doing that really well. What is it going to take for us to implement that here in a nation where we're fundamentally unhealthy as it is?
That's a great point. And so as it relates to incontinence, France does a great job there. But what about other countries who just absolutely kill the postpartum process? Like, what have you learned from best practices around the world that you would like to see implemented at a policy level in the U.S.?
Yeah.
And in the interim, that you could help facilitate those best practices through the technology that all of these mothers are holding in the palm of their hand?
Absolutely. So France obviously is one of the countries. A lot of countries in England or in Europe, Finland, Switzerland, there are actual friends of mine that have flown to have their babies in Switzerland because they have better hospital care. They get to stay there as long as they want. There's even one hospital where they let you have your husband and you have a date night, and they, like, the baby's still in the hospital, and, like, you're in the hospital still with them, and, like, they prioritize some of that. Australia is one of those countries. These are countries that have actually one of the countries that utilize Myri as well. Australia, because they have a lot of education and pregnancy around public health, and there's a lot of dialogue around it. There's importance. Canada, they have 18 months paid leave after they have a baby. So that in itself speaks volumes of where they prioritize where the mother should be. There are other countries like China where they want the mother to just straight up rest for 1 month. Like, and here we're like week 1, and a lot of us I've heard stories where moms are like, well, my husband had to go back to work and he was already traveling, so I was by myself. There's a lot of support systems in other countries where there's, like, the family comes and stays, or they go somewhere where their family is actively helping them. Here, there's a lot of isolation. From a policy standpoint, I think a lot of it starts with enhancing postpartum touch points, right? So not having just a 6-week appointment versus you start those early. You have a 1 week, a 3 week, a 6 week. You're able to hear from the mother in a more consistent pattern so that you're able to identify what she's going through. That would, I don't know which jurisdiction that lies in fundamentally right now, but I feel like that would be a start. And then, although we can't control how long we get in terms of time off, I think from a policy standpoint, to be able to implement that across employers would probably be very difficult, but not having just a 6 to 12 week period. That's not long enough.
Right. So in the U.S., one of the big problems with the healthcare system is this trend of closing rural medical facilities. And
yeah,
with a lot of these programs they're talking about that other countries are implementing, seems like there's a lot of in-person programming. It seems like you have an attractive model for the U.S. to feed into that growth in remote medicine that will be addressing these rural mothers. I mean,
yeah.
It just doesn't seem to me that the economics would be there for there to be enough in-person support. It seems like this has to go digital to impact these patient lives.
Yeah.
And you're there doing it.
Right.
What's the competition like of other people also trying to service that niche?
So specifically in postpartum care for digital health, there are some solutions that will do one piece of what we do, right? Whether it's from just here's some postpartum workouts that you should do. For us, it's more of like, I understand and I've validated that mothers, they want everything in one place and we want it to be science-backed. Our foundation is in evidence-based care. So if you ask any mom, she's Googled at 3 a.m. and probably diagnosed herself with a tumor, because that's what we do when we're like, we're fundamentally in a rocking chair, like, what is this? And is there something wrong with my baby? And we're like, something wrong with me? But I think it's very important to put information in the hands of mothers that is backed by science. So that's one differentiator for us. And also provide a very robust physical therapy recommendation that we do in the application that continues to recalibrate based off of input from the mother. So not just saying, here you go, here's an application, but like, here you go. We're going to keep getting information to understand your journey a little better, and the app will then reprogram to serve you. I think having clinical outcomes is key. So you can go on YouTube and say, I want a postpartum workout. A lot of these things are not vetted, and a lot of them make the outcomes worse for the mother. They can actually exacerbate diastasis recti, a fancy word for abdominal separation. They can actually make incontinence worse. A lot of moms at week 6 are like, oh, I'm cleared for workout. Awesome. I'm going to go do Orange Theory. And then they're like, wait, why did I feel like everything's about to fall out? And I'm like, because your pelvic floor has not been strengthened, and there's a bunch of organs in there, like your bladder and stuff, that might be falling out. And so fundamentally, I think that we've put so much love and care and intentionality into what we've built at Myri from ground up that I think we're able to serve a greater population with better outcomes.
So you just recently finished a Techstars program in Tulsa, and I know that Myri Health is in the process of raising another round. Could you give us a basic rundown on how much you've accepted to date, what this round is, who's going to be participating, what it's going to allow you to achieve, and ultimately, how can the audience get involved?
Yeah. So we bootstrapped up until last year. Obviously, Cortado Ventures is one of our first investors, and we raised a little bit of capital, but now we're actively raising our pre-seed round of funding. And just got off the tails of Techstars a couple of weeks ago, which was a great experience. Happy to have them as a partner as well. As we navigate this round of funding, we're actively talking to investors. Obviously, in Oklahoma, we've had success here. We've had investors here, but investors that are not in Oklahoma, that are actively or have previously worked with payers that have navigated the healthcare space. We fundamentally think that the long game, speaking with payers and providers, makes a lot of sense for us. So having those investors on our cap table, maybe even having a payer on our cap table, makes a lot of sense as well, because they are in the industry. And providing Myri as a preventative solution to payers is resonating very well with a lot of these other investors. So we just kicked off our fundraising process. We've got about 30 to 35% of the round committed. And so we'll be seeking a lead investor or identifying who our lead investor will be pretty soon. Yeah.
Well, great, Pinkey. I know with Cortado, we're super proud of the great work that you're doing. We're excited about the business case, the huge market that you're addressing, the extremely important work. All the women in our lives are very appreciative. So we couldn't be more grateful to have you in our portfolio. And thank you for joining us today. And looking forward to seeing the great ways that you change postpartum care.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, have a good one.